Okay, welcome back. And in this episode, I want to continue talking about Gideon. If you've missed the previous episodes, go back. In the first one about Gideon, I talk about the context and kind of what's going on. It's really important to understand that because how we read the Old Testament, how we read these passages is affected by how we think that what God is doing in our lives today. Like, we have to recognize that the political world we live in, the economic world, the religious world, all of these things are so much better because of what God was doing back in this day and age. Because what he did here has brought us into the place that we're at, has led us to the prosperity. Look, if he didn't set down these rules, these laws, that Moses handed down, and then try to create a nation that would follow those rules. And that's the trick, right? Try to create a nation that would follow those rules. They would have dried up. They would have been worth nothing. The paper on, that they were written on would have just dried up and crumbled. And God needed this to be embodied in a nation, and that was the nation of Israel. And so at this point in the Bible, in the book of Judges, the nation of Israel is going through some growing pains. Well, not even growing pains. They're going through a dark ages, right? They had all that victory of Moses. They had Joshua lead them into the promised land. They had, they conquered it all and they were doing really good. But then after Joshua died and all the elders that were there at that time died, they got into trouble. They started to follow the religions, the politics of the nations that were still there, and then they got oppressed by those nations. And so we come to the book of Judges, and it's 325 years of just cycles of disobedience and then oppression because they don't follow God. God allows them to be oppressed by these nations who are surrounding them and in the area and everything. And we come to the story of Gideon, and it's just amazing what God does. And it just strikes me, it burrows deep into my heart what God does here and how he works with Gideon and how he takes someone who is kind of a plain, normal guy, and it's not and he works amazing things through him. And so last time we talked about kind of Gideon's call and the fact that, God said, you can do this because I will be with you. Gideon said, look, I'm the least. I'm the least in my in my family, and my clan is the weakest in my tribe, and so you can't use me. You can't use me. And God said, no. I am with you. And so Gideon says next. This is and so what I want to talk about today that's relevant for our lives now is how does Gideon sort this out? Like, how does he know what to do next, right? Because God gave him the call. He said it bluntly. He said, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? Okay, well, there you go. Boom, that should be enough, right? But Gideon is a little bit freaked out by this, and he needs a sign. He needs what before I go and do all this stuff, can you give me a sign that it's really you talking to me? And so the Lord says, sure, basically. He says, so Gideon says, look, please don't go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it down before you. And so the Lord says, sure, I'll wait. So Gideon goes away. He prepares some meat and some bread and some broth, and he brings this all together and brings it back. And the angel of God says to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and place them on the rock and pour out the broth. I love this image. So there's this, obviously some kind of a rock, and he puts the meat and the bread on the rock, and then he pours the broth over top. Okay, now at first this might seem weird because Gideon is offering him some food, obviously, for the journey or whatever, being good hospitality there. But then the angel of the Lord touches the meat and the unleavened bread, and fire flares from the rock, consuming it, consuming the meat and the bread completely, right? And then the angel of the Lord disappears. Okay, so pretty dramatic moment, right? So he asks for a sign, and this is what happens. The meat and the bread are totally consumed in a burst of flame, and the angel of the Lord disappears like that. And Gideon says, "Oh no." He says, "Oh, Sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." And he is totally disturbed by this because it is well known you cannot see the face of God and survive. Okay? You can read back in the previous books of the Bible, and it explains that. You can't see God face to face. You will not survive. And maybe, Gideon is concerned because he doesn't realize this is an angel or whatever. And anyway, he's concerned that this sign that he asked for is going to actually be his death. But what happens? The Lord said to him, "Peace, do not be afraid, you're not going to die." And this moment is the moment in the Bible where another name of God comes to the fore, and we learn something about God's nature, about his essence, and that is that he is the God of peace. It says that Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, "The Lord is Peace." That is an amazing situation, okay? Like, think about that. So Gideon is given this great commission to do what he's supposed to do. He feels totally inadequate for it. God says, "Forget about all that. I'm going to be with you." And Gideon says, "Okay, I really want to believe you. I really want to believe you. But can you just give me a sign? Can I just get a little, confirmation that this is what you want me to do, that this is what I should be doing?" And he does. He gives him this massive sign. And then Gideon's freaked out, like, "Oh no, what have I done?" And God says, No. Don't be afraid. And Gideon realizes that God is a God of peace. Now, he doesn't mean peace in the sense of no war, because he's actually calling him to go to war against the Midianites. And in fact, the very next section here, Gideon is supposed to go and destroy the altar of Baal and Asherah. And it's like, so like, this isn't a lack of violence. This isn't a lack of doing what he is required to do. Because, again, God is trying to establish a nation that will follow him, a nation that will lead to all of the prosperity, all of the freedom, all of the abundance that we deal with today, that we live in. This is a heritage of what God is trying to do at this point. And so it's not that God won't fight against injustice, against other, religious ideas and these problems that, that they're facing. It's not that, but it is that God is not, he's not an angry, it's like he's not an angry God. He's not whimsical. Like, that the contrast is the God of Baal and Asherah, who they have to sacrifice their children to in order to appease them, right? So that's the contrast. You got to keep it into this context, right? And God is saying, no, I'm not like that. That is not how you should think of me. And Gideon learns something really powerful here. He learns that Yahweh, the Lord, is peace. That is his nature. That is his way of being. And that he's not just going to irrationally smite Gideon for asking for this sign. Okay, so that's an important development, and I think the way that it speaks to me in my day-to-day life is that I don't have to be afraid when I'm approaching God. You know, and I don't know if it's often fear that we don't approach God, that we don't talk to God. I think sometimes, though, it is like we're not sure what we should bring to God. And I say, bring it all. Bring it all. I have never been disappointed with bringing it all to God and showing Him and giving it all to Him and saying, God, I don't know, please help. And that moment, so many times I sit and I try to meditate um, or journal or read my Bible, and I'm so distracted by all the things that are coming and going, and all the worries and fears and the big tasks ahead of me, the big vision, and all these things chip away, right? Chip away at my faith, my belief, my resilience, and yet when I bring that to God, I feel peace. I'm at peace. And that is a blessing. That is such a blessing. So that's it for this episode, this session. I just want to thank you again for listening. Please share, rate, and review it on iTunes or whatever, wherever you're watching this, or YouTube or something. I would really appreciate your feedback too. So please share, and thanks for listening, and God bless you. We'll speak soon.